Hey, everybody, before we start the show, I just wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Kobold Press. Kobold Press are the makers of many fine game products, like the Kobold Complete Guide to Game Design 2nd Edition. This is the ultimate resource for gamers, game masters, and designers. The Emmy Award-winning first edition of the Complete Kobold Guide to Game Design laid out concepts, techniques, and advice from game design professionals, and it enhanced so many games and adventures. Now, the 2nd edition brings together essays from the original volume, many updated to reflect the changing game design landscape, as well as new essays by veteran designers Jeff Grubb, Kelly Pollack, Amber Scott, and Ray Vallacy. Get practical, thought-provoking essays on world building, creating magic systems, conflict, and compelling stories. What to expect when you work as a design professional, and so much more. Conceptual chapters examine what game design is and how to design a good game, how to create the best games. There are concrete examples to provide you with models and help you create well-rounded designs and exciting adventures. Get the Complete Kobold Guide to Game Design 2nd Edition now at koboldpress.com. Tell them DSPN sent you. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I am talking with Brian Suskind, who is a screenwriter and longtime game designer who's done a lot of work with the amazing Kobold Press, as well as other design companies. He has an incredible mind for story and for game design, so let me jump into my conversation with him right now. All right, everybody, now I'm here with a great game designer and an amazing guest, a storyteller. Brian, for people who don't know, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
My name is Brian Suskind. I'm a designer for Kobold Press, along with Storm Bunny Studios and Bright Publishing and lots of other places. Freelance game designer. I've been doing this for a bit now, and I think I sort of understand how the rules work, and then they go ahead and change it on me every time. So it's...
Just when we think we have a grasp on it, they're like, here's 6th edition.
And it annoys my home players to death because, we'll be playing and I'll mention a rule and they'll be like, that's not in this game. I'm like, damn it.
I know. Listen, the number of times I've said reflex saving throw and
I still ask for spot checks.
Stare at me. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
all the time. Yeah. This is a hide check. What's that? That's not a skill.
That's not a skill. Ben bars lift gates.
Exactly. Yes. But let's chat, because you also have another career as a writer that I think sort of fits into tabletop role-playing games pretty well. Can you talk about that?
My day gig, if I can call it that, is I'm a professional screenwriter. It's interesting. It's kind of two creative worlds that are somewhat similar and somewhat different at the same time. So yeah, I live out in LA and write screenplays for TVs and movies and really anything anybody would pay me for, to be honest. I'm not shy about that.
Yeah, no, and it's a great way to make a living. So I write TV promos, so
it's not a great way to make a living. It is a way to make a living.
That's true.
You're very successful at it. It's a great way, but most of us writers, it's a way to make a living.
Exactly. Yeah, and so I'm in the same boat, right? I do game design, and then I'm in like even the more of the dregs. I'm doing TV promos. So
I love TV promos. How do you not like TV promos?
Oh, I love it. I would just say it's not as prestigious as what you're doing, which I'm fine with. I'm also fine with.
It might be more prestigious, to be honest. There's a kind of view in Hollywood, like writers. We don't need those guys.
Sure, but try being a marketer. They're like, oh, what the scum of the earth.
Until they need you, and then they're like, please market my project.
It's true. So I like I'm part of this world of creative by day and night, and I find that when I dream about like super mundane things, and I don't know if that's my brain, like, we need a break.
Oh, see, I'm the opposite. Like, my wife makes fun of me because I'll wake up and she'll be like, well, how was the night or whatever. And I say, I had this amazing dream. I dream in action movies
Oh,
for the most
nice.
part. Like, I'll have these epic dreams and I'll tell her about it, which of course my wife doesn't like gaming. I mean,
Mhm.
she's fine that I do it, but she's just never gotten into it. And so
Mhm.
I'll tell her this long rambling action adventure thing. And she's like, yes, but what are we having for breakfast? It's like, that's nice, dear. And skip ahead.
That's very funny. Well, so I wanted to talk to you kind of about both your careers, how they go hand in hand. But I'm wondering if you could sort of first take me all the way back and talk about when you first played a tabletop role playing game. What did you play? Were you the game master? Were you a player? Set the scene for me.
Well, the first time I ever played D&D, I was in like 4th grade. And I'm 46. So
Mhm.
it's, that's quite a while ago. And I think we cheated and we were gods by the second day, and it, didn't really last a week
That
because this is
sounds
back in
right.
the, mid 80s, But the first time I think I really played and took it seriously was after I moved out to California. I met a bunch of people through the Society for Creative Anachronism, the SCA, the Medieval Recreation Group, because I was a medieval historian in college, and so I met a bunch of these fellow history nerds, and I got invited to a Planescape game. And so Planescape was the first campaign I ever played in, and it's still like one of my dear loves in all of gaming is Planescape. And I played or I think it was like a abominable snowman fighter. He had like an intelligence of 4. He talked to himself in the third person, you know. And so his name was Thogar. Yes, Thogar, the Alagi fighter. He just walked around. Thogar like cake. That was sort of his vibe, and I loved it. I mean, I fell in love with it, and I just started playing one game after another. But and I was just a player. I played in this campaign, and then I decided I was going to run a game,
Mhm.
and I ran Eberron for
Oh,
this group of
nice.
friends, and we played every week for 7 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and
Wow.
it was this long running campaign. Went from like first level to 18th level or something like that. Just epic. It was one of those like world spanning. And I started with
Mhm.
like I think they had like 2 or 3 published Ebron adventures at the time, and I ran 2 of those because I had no idea how to run games. And uh, I ran my group through that, and then sort of branched off from that into one of those like you need the 8 objects to save the world. Oh,
Mhm,
look, I
mhm.
dropped into like movie phone voice. Um, in a world where it was sort of one of those things, and uh, at the same time, I was already writing professionally. And
Mhm,
what was funny was my players used to tease me because like uh, I would definitely railroad them. I
mhm.
mean, there was no doubt I mean, they used to go, "Hey, Brian, choo choo, hop on the train. What do we get any say in any of this?" And it was sort of like learning by teasing.
Mhm.
Uh, and it's sort of how I learned to not, not role play my play or not railroad my players.
Sure.
And so yeah, I ran 2 large Ebron campaigns, and then now we run. I think we have a different game every Monday with my home group.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. That's great. And, so at what point did you say, I'm doing this writing thing. Yeah, I could probably write these books, write some games.
Well, I stumbled into Wolfgang Bauer's open design world back before
Mm.
when Cobalt Press was young and rocks were new. Um, and it was I don't know if all of your listeners know about open design, but this is before Kickstarter and before all of that, and it was basically a patronage system through LiveJournal where you'd send Wolfgang some money and you got to see behind the scenes of how things were made, and you got to like give input, and eventually you could offer suggestions about stuff and not edit, but like, he would put a blurb, a chunk of text, and you could comment on it.
Right, right.
And he would teach, he taught us, he taught all of us who were doing it, like
Mhm.
how to design, don't use passive voice, and don't, make sure that everything you put in there has something to do with adventuring.
Right.
And so it became this very creative world. And I through that I met, Ben McFarlane, who I partnered on in several projects, and Wolfgang, obviously, and a lot of other people in the gaming world. And that's sort of how I got started. And back then it was just sort of a lark. I was doing it. I was in film school, and I was sort of doing it on the side.
Mhm.
I think I was even in between campaigns. Like I had finished that Planescape campaign, but I hadn't started the Eberron one yet. And so I was missing gaming, and so I started doing that. And eventually, some projects I was more active on than other ones, but eventually I started pitching because, like, he would say, okay, someone wants to pitch a monster, and people would throw in things, and he would critique them, which was great because you'd get like
Mhm.
professional critique on. I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
And my first stuff sucked. I mean, it was terrible. I mean, I don't even, I couldn't tell you what they were, but I know that they were awful.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But like everybody's stuff is awful at first, but then eventually I started getting a handle of it, and by the time was it Journeys to the West hit, I had signed on to that, and it came time to pitch sort of these adventures, and I was like, well, let me do two, and I pitched two adventures, and Ben, who was doing a lot of the grunt work on that one, was like, these are great, and he and I had already sort of met, online, and he's like, you're a writer, and in your regular job, you can handle two adventures, do those. And that's sort of how I got started.
That's really, really cool. And so not to make you keep talking about how I got started stories, but I guess the other thing would be, how did you get started in screenwriting? How did that come about?
I've always read fantasy books and read, adventure books. And when I went to college, I went to Brown, and I was gonna do fiction writing. That was sort of what I thought I would do.
Mhm.
But Brown wasn't really into speculative fiction writing as much as they were into, journalistic writing. And I
Sure,
sort of
sure.
stopped
Yeah.
doing fiction writing, and I, took some film classes there. And film analysis in college is sort of, I found them annoying, to be honest, because a
Mhm.
lot of film
Mhm.
analysis classes are like, you're watching a movie, and people are like, well, I could see how the writer struggles with the cross section of humanity, and you're like, we're watching Bill and Ted. I mean, this is not it's not like rocket science here. This is just an entertaining movie. Can't they just be entertaining?
Right, right.
But I got a job at a college working for a company called DePass Entertainment in LA. They did
Mm,
the Larry McMurtry westerns that were on, you know,
gotcha.
probably before a lot of your, listeners were born. Um, and I was doing development. I was, reading scripts and helping, doing development stuff. And after a bunch of years of that, I was like, wow, a lot of people don't know how to write, and I knew I could. And so I
Mhm,
went to film
mhm.
school and and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I shifted over and went to UCLA and went to film school and sort of learned, from that how to write scripts. And I luckily enough, I had a mentor by a man named Jim Hart, who wrote Hook and Contact, Dracula, Tuck
Oh,
Everlasting,
yeah.
and he's a dear friend of mine. And he sort of took me under his wing and went, okay, this is how this works. And he kind of
Oh,
shepherded me onto
cool.
my first couple projects for screenwriting. Was, he called it his you get Jim for cheap, because they would pay me, and Jim would sort of just supervise the project, and they would pay him, less than his usual fee, but he didn't have to do much work on it, so that was great. And that's sort of how I got started.
That's really cool. That's great. I mean, I think there's probably some obvious parallels between the two, but before we get into how they're the same, I would love to talk about how they're different, because I know I was, after writing commercials and stuff, I was like, I can write games, it's no problem, right? And oh my god, it's different.
Yeah, it is. I almost think every kind of writing is a different beast. I mean, just going from,
Mhm.
I know a lot of people who've written fiction and then they try to write screenplays, and boy, you can certainly
Right.
tell. Um, we used to have
Yeah.
a trick in when I used to write script coverage when I was working for the production company, where you would just take a script in your hand and you would flip the pages like you're doing a flip book. And if you saw a lot of black, like many too big, heavy text, you would go, they don't know what they're doing. You put it aside. and, and it's awful that we used to do that. But when you have 20 scripts to read, you don't really have the time. But it's that sort of a thing
Totally.
where screen fiction writing is very immersive, and screenwriting is not. I mean, it is and it
Mhm.
isn't. It's almost immersive in subtext, because you're the stuff you put on the page is for the director to bring to life. It's not. you're not putting anything from inside the character except how they act or what they say. Those are the only two things you have: what they physically do or what they say. And so if you can't transmit what they're thinking with that, then you basically don't, just dump it and move on. But with game design, and there is a difference between game design for module for like an adventure and campaign setting.
Definitely.
In terms of, especially in terms of how they relate to screenwriting, I would say campaign design or setting design is probably closer, because you have a little bit more space. You have a little bit more leeway to talk about why things are happening. You could say, this king, exiled all the elves, but you could say why. In an adventure, you could, but unless it's really important to the adventure, why are you? But I think for me, the main difference is, with a screenplay, you're locking the story down, and there's really no wiggle room. This is what happens. I mean, at least until the director gets a hold of it and changes everything you've done. But assuming that doesn't happen for some reason, you're locking it down. This is what happens. With an adventure, even a published one, you are sort of railroading your players, because a published adventure, you're not expanding on all the possible things that could happen. But there's still room. I mean, the players could decide, we're going to skip this one chamber and we're going to go to the next one. A screenplay, they only go into the rooms you want them to go into, and you don't even mention the other ones. And so it's almost like, in a lot of ways, I think of adventure writing like screenplays without borders. I'm not confined to what I have to describe to keep the story going. I can take an aside and describe this one room because it'll be fun if the players go in here. But it might not have anything to do with whatever quest they're on.
Totally. Right. And that's, I think for me, right, one of the joys of a dungeon is you kind of have the parameters that help keep the players contained, but then they can go wherever they want. They can interact with things, right? There's more than one way to disarm a trap. You can throw your best friend into it. You can use magic, all that kind of stuff. So, and I think about that like Sandboxes then, right? Like Ravenloft is the sandbox with the firmest perimeter.
Oh yeah, you're not leaving.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, oh, cool. We only need to design a space this big, and you can go wherever you want in it, and you're probably going to die if you go off this road. But we didn't have to over design, and now you've got the room to play kind of in this big sandbox.
Well, and the new Ravenloft book turned out so great too that I ran a couple players through it. They was like I just had 2 players, and we decided to just do a one-off. And I killed them with the first encounter just so that I could bring them back. And I didn't do it on purpose. I just threw a lot of wolves at them, and they happened to roll really bad. My players, if they're listening, this is true. They are the worst die rollers I've ever seen in my entire life. Our record at the table is they're up to 11 ones in a 2-hour game.
Wow.
I barely need to throw monsters at them. They could almost die eating a salad. I mean, it's somewhat pathetic, but it is hysterical.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
It's amazingly bad. I mean, and it's always at the worst, worst or best time, depending on you look at it. Yeah, the sandbox campaign or a sandbox adventure, that's my bread and butter. I love those. I mean, I love running them. I love designing them, just because you have the freedom to you're expanding anything you want.
Exactly.
And it's that for me that's. Yeah, maybe I take it back what I said earlier. I think maybe a sandbox adventure is closest to a screenplay.
Yeah,
and maybe setting design is closer to fiction. Though I hate to say that, because now a lot of fiction writers might hear that and go, "Well, I could write a campaign book," and it's not the same. I mean,
no,
because one of the lessons that Wolfgang hammered into us back in the day was anything that you add to a campaign book, especially. Everything you add either has to lend itself to an adventure or support an adventure you've already sort of talked about. And Ben and I just finished a project for Kobold Press where it's a campaign expansion. And I I'm not allowed to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it anyway without naming names.
Got it.
And I spent a while designing this one area, and I was talking about what kind of clothes they wore and, what kind of food they ate, because it's a different enough of a place where that was important. But then I sort of looked back at the, 1,200 words I spent talking about hats or whatever and went, this isn't really important to adventuring. Like, unless there's some hat-based adventure that's going to pop up.
Right.
Hat mimics invade the kingdom. I don't know. But, and I had to kind of go back and go, okay, I'm going to cut this down to 200-300 words maybe. But it's that sort of thing, a lot of my friends who are really into writing fiction, who have then tried to write campaign or settings, they fall into this trap of, I'm just going to talk about it like it's a world. And while it is a world, it's a world designed for adventurers.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you're talking about things that are for adventures, there's no point in talking about it.
Right. Yeah. It even we get that way with our backgrounds, especially like world building and stuff, right? How many DMs, especially when you're first starting out, have created this is my lineage of 47 kings that have ruled this land. And it's like your players are not even going to learn the name of the current king, let alone.
And you could tell them 12 times and they're not going to remember.
Exactly. So, I love that. That's such good advice and such a good thing to have hammered into you, because it really does. It also comes down to sort of word economy, right? A printed product can only have so many words in it before it becomes unruly or really expensive. And
I keep trying to tell these publishers, like, look, just give me all the words, and I'll just keep writing. And they never want to do it. It's weird, Like, I can't have 8 million words to write this project.
Ridiculous.
I know. God. They also don't want to give me Writers Guild of America scale. So I think that's sort of weird.
That is also very, what? Come on. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Elderwood Academy. Elderwood Academy hand make beautiful gaming products. These are so insane. I'm talking about scrolling, rolling trays. That's right. They look like scrolls when they're rolled up. Boom, now they're a dice tray. I'm talking about Codex dice towers. They look like these incredible, better than the Da Vinci Code. I'm bringing it, dice towers. That's right. You put your dice inside, they come out. Critical hits all day, hopefully. Hex chest dice boxes that have these magnets. They snap together. Beautiful carved designs. These will be the most beautiful things at your gaming table. So I want you to head on over to elderwoodacademy.com/don't-split. That's elderwoodacademy.com/don't-split, where you can check out all of the amazing products they have to offer, like spell books. Oh my gosh, these spell books that you can carry around all your gaming supplies in. They look like the Acquisitions Inc. employee manual. It is incredible. elderwoodacademy.com/don't-split. Go check it out now. Let's get back to the babble. How do you think it's similar? Like as far as narrative, like crafting a narrative and that kind of thing. Do you think there's similarities there?
Well, I think at its heart, everything's a story, and we as humans, unless there's those of your listeners who aren't human, I don't know. Maybe there aren't. I don't want to be that guy, But we're sort of, in our society, we're sort of have a certain story ingrained in our brains. I mean, Joseph Campbell hit on it with the hero's journey, and and even the 3-act structure for screenplays is playing into this kind of root story that we as people sort of come to expect. We expect things to sort of have this narrative increase in danger, and then there'll be some big, turn of events that makes everything look like it's going to end poorly, and then there's a redemption moment, and that's a core sort of story structure. And you see it in movies, you see it in books, and you see it in role-playing games. I mean, the best adventures have this sense of building tension. There probably is built in there somewhere a sense of this is here at this point, things could go really horribly for you.
Right.
The difference with role-playing games is that you can't say when these things are going to happen.
Right.
And so the order is all mixed up. You might have a room in a dungeon or something where, unless you've activated the 8 pillars in the other parts of the dungeon, this room will be unwinnable. And so that's both your, dark moment and your redemption moment built in, depending on when you get to it. So screenplays, for me, I look at the kind of the hero's journey and the 3-act structure as almost lessons for adventure writing, or even setting design, because it's this sense that things build up. You have to establish characters quickly with an economy of words. You don't have 3 pages to describe your NPCs,
Right.
and so you have to and you have to describe it in such a way that grabs the player's attention. As we know, players' attention are fleeting. What's the old rule of 3 meme, where it's you spend 3 hours designing the room with the bad guy underneath the cloth, and you go in and you happen to mention there's a feather on the other side of the room, and that just is off the top of your head, and the player spends 6 hours looking at the feather. And that's no slight against players. It's just human nature. I mean, the thing you design won't necessarily be the thing that grabs their attention.
Right.
Even if you have blinking lights pointing at it. So, you have to get this, in screenwriting and in game design, there's this sense of you be very narrative, very descriptive in a short amount of space to tell players how people are. In screenwriting, you usually mention a character's name, and sometimes you have parentheses or sometimes just commas, and you'll say, tough, takes no nonsense, loves his mom, close parentheses, and that's the character. And on screen, of course, that you have more time with that, and the costume designer and the director and the actor all put in their own vibe on it that builds it out. But on text, or when you're reading it, that's all you have. And so in game design, you have to do something similar, where you have to describe an NPC, especially if it's an important NPC, with a couple of words that really grab the players. Because I don't know about you, but when I can give my players that moment where they're upset that an NPC died,
right,
that's a great moment.
Yes.
Because all too often they murder hoboing their way through things, and they're like, well, we should kill that NPC ourselves. And you're like, oh God,
yeah, it's
why?
Pretty nice armor. Yeah.
Yeah, he's just a fruit merchant. Why are you attacking that guy?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true, right? And putting together something that gives a DM the tools to create an NPC that is compelling for their characters is huge. I read so many adventures sometimes where it's like, everyone is a jerk.
Right.
And it's like,
and you wonder why the PCs don't like it.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, well, this is why the PCs have started killing the fruit merchants, because everyone else they've met is terrible, and everyone has backstabbed them or ripped them off or that kind of thing. And it's, as I've gotten older, I've realized, like, oh, okay, it makes sense that things have gotten better,
Yeah. I mean, I love layered NPCs. I mean, you start off with some sort of trope. It's the kindly old wizard, or it's the harsh looking cleric guy, or it's the the old king with the young wife, or whatever it is. And then I love to add something that's completely unexpected to that character, because those are the things that grab you.
Right.
And it's the same, and in a lot of ways, it's grabbing the players is a great thing to learn about game design, because even in room design or encounters, it's those little wrinkles that make things memorable. Ben McFarlane and I always, tease each other, because both of us are the kind of designers who like to push the envelope. We like to, well, 5e doesn't say you could do this. Well, it doesn't say you can't do this either. And we'll, and then we'll get editors kind of going, well, you can't do that. And we're like, well, but you could. When we designed Southlands, we had a kingdom that we were designing that was really based around divination. They had a lot, they had these kind of ancestor worship, and they had these, preserved skulls that would talk to them. And it was a very cool setting. And we were like, well, what kind of player crunch can we give this? And I came up with combat divination. And, an ability to use divination in combat, because I mean, divination up until then, you never use it in combat. It was like, you cast augury or you'd cast, commune and ask some questions and it was never something you could use. And so we designed a series of spells. This was back in Pathfinder, but it was a series of spells that were basically swift actions. And the conceit of it was that, yeah, you're reacting before the bad guy because you knew it was coming. And it's those little wrinkles that I think make things interesting. And in screenwriting, that sort of developed for me because you were always sort of looking at various ways to twist things. And I brought that over to game design. It's the idea of trying to just change it up just a little bit to keep people guessing.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's the same thing happens in television shows and films and games is I see where this is going, right? Like I know what's going to happen next. And if you can pull that rug in a cool way, I think that's great. I think my players would look at the divination nation and think, well, these people can't take us out at all. Right. And be mistaken. And so there's a lot of fun to be had with subverting expectations or twisting things just enough that it really throws people for a loop and makes sense. That makes perfect narrative sense why those things would happen. Very satisfying when that all lines up like that.
I mean, I think one of the things that I don't get in screenwriting, I mean, I guess maybe I do, is choice. I mean, I guess I get a choice when I'm writing it because it's a blank page, but I can't ever write in a screenplay. This could go either way. Right. I have to decide how a certain situation turns out because it's the story. But in a game, you can write in a choice, and it could take things, especially not so much in a published adventure because you don't have the room to kind of write down all the possible permutations of something, but especially in your home campaign, I love putting in choices into my home game. And it's led to the most amazing moments. Actually, my greatest moment as a GM was because of this. I threw in a pool in this Eberron game I was running. And if you drank from the pool, you could pick a boon or have a random bad thing happen to you. Or you could pick a bad thing and have a random good thing happen to you. And one of my players, she decided to, she was going to she picked the bad thing. Mm-hmm, and she picked alignment change.
Oh, wow.
And she did it because it was a whole background reason for her character. And, and it was all revolved around like she hated her father because, he blamed her for her mother's death. There was all, backstory thing. And so she did that, and she became chaotic evil. No, lawful evil. She went from chaotic good to lawful evil, and hid it from the other players for 5 years.
Wow!
She multi-classed into assassin. It was this whole thing, and it was she told them at the end of the last game.
Right.
But of course, this is also the same player who, because I'm sometimes a jerk as a GM, I threw in a deck of many things. Because because why not?
Of course.
And she drew a wish, and the table went crazy. People are like, you could become 20th level. You could wish for magic items. And she looked at me and said, "I wish to know how my mother died."
Wow.
She wished for character backstory. I almost cried.
That's awesome. Yes, that's great. That's so good.
And I can still see in my head the looks on the faces of some of the other players, especially the dudes who are like,
"Right,
you're doing what? What are you doing?"
Yeah. Are you sure you don't want a pet Tarrasque?
Yeah.
You're sure you don't want a pet Tarrasque?
Call him Fluffy. I mean,
right. Oh, wow. That's just great. And it's, those are the kinds of moments that it's great to see and choices that people make, especially as it seems like, more and more adults, right? We're role playing now. We started as kids and now we've held on to it. And so now there can be very sort of sophisticated stories and deeper choices that are made with character, which is great. And some of us are big kids and just want to pet Tarrasque.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Do you have a favorite project that you have worked on so far that's out there that you can talk about at the moment? You've worked on so many things, so I know it's.
I mean, I love love Southlands that I wrote with Ben McFarlane
Mhm.
for Cobalt
Oh,
Press. I mean, it was.
that is a beautiful book
Thank
and
you, thank you.
amazing. Yeah, it's really
It,
cool.
it was a great, amazing book to write. Uh, we were initially a little. I mean, we pitched it to Wolfgang, and then he didn't get back to us for like a half a year, and we went, oh, okay, well, I guess And we were doing other things for him, so it wasn't like we were like, okay, I guess he just doesn't want to do it. And then all of a sudden, he's like, you should do this project. And but I mean, for those of you who don't know, Southlands is Midgard, which is the Cobalt Press campaign world, is a real world analog. So all the continents look very familiar, and Southlands deals with Africa. And here Ben and I are both two white guys. I'm from New York. He's actually from upstate New York, and I'm from New York City. And we're both sort of like, we'll be writing about Africa. That and we said to Wolfgang, should we watch what we say here? I mean, what do you he's like, listen, you just have to go for it, and just go for it. Write what you think you need to write. There was a couple of things we know we didn't win. We knew we didn't want to touch on, like slavery, for example. But it was like, that freedom made doing the project just an amazing experience. I mean, I love that. I have to say, I love Bloodlines of Black Magic from Storm Bunny Studios, which is sort of it's now going to be 5th edition, but it's it's like Buffy meets Cthulhu. So it was a modern Pathfinder, and now it'll be a modern 5e. One of the books that came out last year for Cobalt Press, Midgard Sagas, I wrote a murder mystery, which I did basically because it's very hard to write murder mysteries as a role-playing game.
Right, yeah, especially in some role-playing games have like the engines for it, right? And even those, like if you write a Gumshoe adventure, you have to be so detailed, and you need fewer plot holes is what you need.
Well, and there's certain game systems that lend themselves better, like Call of Cthulhu. Very easy to run a murder mystery because you have all these skills. And, technically there's nothing preventing 5e from doing that either, but it's just the game system itself is not doesn't lend itself well.
Right, right.
And people don't think like detectives.
Right,
it's like the thing with the feather again. And, people forget to look for clues, or they don't sort of follow the right narrative. And so what I realized eventually was I took a page from Raymond Chandler, the thriller murder mystery writer from the 20s or the 40s, I should say, who he wrote all the Dashiell Hammett stuff, and he had a book about writing, and in it he says, when the plot starts to lag, have a guy kick in the door.
Right.
And so I designed a murder mystery where that had a cutoff point. At a certain point, something will happen, and it basically becomes a chase.
Oh, cool.
And so I don't ever say who the murderer is. That's up to the players to figure out, and the GM can follow along. and when that cutoff thing happens, the guy who runs is the guy that the players have decided is the bad guy.
That's so cool. That's great.
And so it's infinitely replayable because it could be a different person every time.
Exactly. And that's a really a great way to do it, especially with D&D, right? Like where, because you don't have all of those tools like Call of Cthulhu necessarily. And it would just be making investigation check after investigation check. You have this cool way of players can go about solving the mystery how they want. And that's really awesome.
And I think without screenwriting, I don't think I would have come up with it, because that's sort of a very screenwriting structural thing. It's this idea that at a certain point everything's going to go bad, and you have to account for it.
Exactly.
And I have one project coming out from Playground Games.
Yes, that
was a passion project of mine, and I pitched it to Wolfgang, and he went, "That's not going to work for Midgard." And I pitched to BJ Hensley, and she was insane enough to go, "Oh yeah, we'll do that." And I can't say too much about it because it's still coming out, but it is the craziest thing I've ever written, and I've written some crazy things.
Wow! I can't wait for that.
Yeah.
And Playground, they do a lot of stuff geared towards families and kids, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, this is probably it's dark enough where BJ was actually considering putting in a disclaimer on the cover saying, like, Playground Games for kids. This game is not for kids. So we'll have to see what final form it takes. But it's one of those, I have to give her credit. I would send her pages and she'd go, "Ooh, you got to tone that back just a bit." And she's like, and I'm like, but we're still okay to go forward. She's like, yeah, we're still good. I'm like, all right.
That's great. Well, and if you think about, my wife and I were talking about this the other day. All of the things we watched as kids that are, Beetlejuice, which is a really, truly dark story,
Oh, yeah.
They made that into a cartoon. You know what I mean? Like
and a Broadway musical.
Yeah, exactly. Never-ending story. That horse getting sucked into the mud.
Oh, yeah. Well, even Old Yeller. I mean, they killed the dog. What's with that?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think kids are capable of darker than we give them credit for.
Well, Sid and Marty Krofft alone is the stuff of nightmares.
Oh, yes. Yes. So, Brian, I would love for you to come back and chat with us more about stuff. But in the meantime, where can people find you and check out what you're doing?
Well, mostly I'm, any Kobold Press stuff that comes out, I'm usually on most of them. On the Kobold Press Facebook site, I'm always on there answering questions. But I also have a ridiculous web series on YouTube called Heroes with Issues that I've written with a director partner of mine. That's basically superheroes in therapy. And somehow I was originally just going to write the thing, but somehow I ended up playing the doctor in it, mostly because all the rest of the people involved were like in shape stunt people. And I said, we need someone fat and nerdy to play the doctor. And they all looked at me. I went, damn it. So it's on YouTube. It's called Heroes with Issues. We have 2 seasons. It's a funny little show that, they're not very long, and they're right.
Nice. That's amazing. Yes. I can't wait to check that out. And we're going to link all of that over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. Brian, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
Oh, thanks for having me, James. I really appreciate it. I'll come back anytime.
That was a great interview with Brian. People, if you want to support the show financially, head on over to patreon.com/Introcaso. That's patreon.com/Introcaso, where you can support this show with your dollars. Honestly, if Tabletop Babble has been a part of your life for a long time, it would be great to know how much it means to you by having you give a donation, whatever you are able. It really means a lot to me. To those of you who already give, thank you so much. You are helping keep this show afloat and on the airwaves in your ear brains. So yes, thank you so much. There are, of course, rewards there, but the biggest reward is you get to keep this show and other work that I do for free, like World Builder blog, afloat. And, of course, you can head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. If you leave us a 5-star review, I'll read it out loud here on the show. You can make me say anything you want. But, more importantly, you help other people find the show when you do that. Even if you're not listening on Apple Podcasts, odds are your podcatcher is using the algorithms of iTunes to recommend podcasts to others. So, head on over to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. If you're listening right now on your iPhone in Apple Podcasts, guess what? Bada bing, you can just scoot on over, leave us a 5-star review in 10 seconds. Just bing, boom, there it is. So please, if you're listening, do that right now. All right, people, you can find me on Twitter at James Introcaso and at worldbuilderblog.com online. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget, RPGs are like sex. Hey everybody, before we go, I just wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Hero Forge. Hero Forge are the makers of incredible customizable tabletop miniatures with dozens of fantasy races and thousands of parts to choose from. They're updating it all the time, every single week, so you're going to want to check back often. You're going to want to visit heroforge.com so you can start designing a custom mini. They're so great. I have so many of these things. I'm like addicted to Hero Forge. It is so fun to make minis. And guess what? They are having a Black Friday / Cyber Monday sale where you can get $5 off one physical miniature with the code RPG Holiday. all one word. RPG Holiday. Go for all caps, too. RPG Holiday. Sounds like that. So, yes, go check it out. Hero Forge, you're going to love them. You can get them made from plastic, metal, and so many other things. Build your character right before your eyes. Oh, it's so cool. So go check it out at heroforge.com. And don't forget that code RPG Holiday.